Do you think one mind is better than many? Neither do we. A University of Chicago Booth School of Business MBA is for curious and collaborative people who value different perspectives and ideas. Chicago Booth takes pride in empowering and being empowered by women of diverse backgrounds. We believe that fostering an inclusive community creates an environment of analytical, open minded inquiry and produces knowledge with enduring impact. Learn more today at chicagobooth.edu/elevate. Welcome to the Ellevate podcast, conversations with women changing the face of business. Welcome, everybody, to the Ellevate podcast. I am your host, Megan Oliver, and I am so excited because I get to start off this week by telling you what's happening in Ellevate. So we have some roundtables coming up. We do have our Ellevate roundtable, which is all about figuring out your next career move. That's going to be on Thursday. So if you are somebody who is trying to figure out what is next in your career, you will not want to miss this. Our New York City Rising Leaders Roundtable is going to be talking about mastering your executive presence on Thursday. That's actually in person in New York City. So you get the fun of an in-person event with the fun of a roundtable. I wish I was still in New York City for this one because that would be so fun. And our executive roundtable is going to be having a virtual networking elevated next Tuesday. We have one community circle coming up in the next week, and that is our Hispanic, Latina, and Latinx community circle, which is going to be next Tuesday. I love our community circles. You know, I host the LGBTQ one, and I've heard such great things about this community circle. You won't want to miss it. And we have some in-person events coming up. Now, please note, again, I do these a few weeks ahead of time. So in this case, we might have a few more added to the site. Just go to elevatenetwork.com. That's Ellevate with 2 L's. You will see all of our upcoming events. But what I've got on my list here is our DFW chapter. That's me now. Woohoo! Is hosting a monthly happy hour on Wednesday. That's today. Our New York City chapter, again, as I mentioned before, is hosting their Rising Leaders Roundtable, Mastering Your Executive Presence. So again, that is in person if you're in the New York City area. And our Atlanta chapter is hosting their book club. This month's book club is about Never Split the Difference, negotiating as if your life depended on it. And that's going to be next Tuesday. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get to this interview because I'm so excited. I've been waiting for this episode to come out for like a while now because I'm a huge fan of our interview today. Today is Maricella's interview with Elizabeth Leiba. She is a writer, college professor, and advocate for Black businesswomen. Her passion for Black history changed her life and catapulted her into a fulfilling line of work as a powerful advocate of social justice and equity. She's the author of I'm Not Yelling, A Black Woman's Guide to Navigating the Workplace. She's amazing on LinkedIn. I think she's at 170,000 followers now at this point, but like she's one of their top voices. She's incredible. Let's go ahead and get to that interview now. Elizabeth, how are you?
I'm doing phenomenal. Thank you for asking. I'm happy to be here.
I am very excited to have this conversation with you and talk a little bit about your work, your book, the academy you started, so many things that I can just start by saying I think the work you're doing is really, really powerful. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
But how about we start by letting our audience know a little bit about you? Kind of what brought you to what you're doing today?
Thank you for asking. That's a great question. And I think it's been a winding journey, but it ended with me writing a book that right now is selling really well. It's in the top ranked books on Amazon. It's called I'm Not Yelling, A Black Woman's Guide to Navigating the Workplace. So that's kind of where I'm at right now in terms of my work and what I'm doing for social justice and advocacy, particularly just advocating for Black women's psychological safety in the workplace and beyond. But I started out in higher education. I've been in higher education for about 20 years, and I've always worked with students that have historically been excluded, first generation college students. I've been in admissions faculty. Now I work in the corporate office of a career college. And on LinkedIn in 2020, I just started to see that there was a more of a need for people to talk about the pivot to online learning with the pandemic, meeting students' needs, particularly students that were not necessarily even prepared for college. And then they had this out of left side, blind side of having to go to college online. So that really was something I was very vocal about in 2020. and then the George Floyd murder occurred, and it really struck me as a time where I needed to really also be very vocal about the need for racial equity and social justice, and understanding the history of our country and where that has been and where we are today and where we need to go moving forward.
Hmm.
So my journey really started on the LinkedIn platform and really being a very vocal advocate for social justice. And I was interviewed by New York Times, Time Magazine, Forbes, just Entrepreneur, Business Insider, just all these different outlets that started to ask, how is it that you were able to leverage the LinkedIn platform to talk about something like social justice, where LinkedIn has typically been a business networking website. I
Hmm.
really saw that a lot of Black folk, and particularly Black women, just wanted to hear the perspective of the Black experience in the workplace. So that's how I started doing what I've been doing, which is being a very vocal advocate for Black women's empowerment, Black women's business, Black women really leaning into the authenticity of their stories and their voices. And it led me to writing the book, I'm Not Yelling.
It's interesting to me that you started on LinkedIn because it is very true that, it's LinkedIn has traditionally been a platform for just business networking and making those connections. And I have heard from other people sometimes that uh, the algorithm might downgrade or not pop up as much when it comes to topics around social justice or racism, particularly. I don't know if you've encountered that.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think for the most part, LinkedIn is a direct reflection of society and the workplaces that we live in, which is why psychological safety and the Black experience and understanding the importance of that is really important, because of the fact that LinkedIn has been looked at as primarily a business networking, professional networking platform. It really wasn't geared toward those kinds of conversations. It was very much about interview strategy and how to get your resume
Mhm.
out there, how to connect with recruiters. And it really wasn't until the pandemic that those of us that were in those professional environments and were sheltering in place, working from home, started to really see that there wasn't that water cooler talk. There wasn't anywhere to really put those feelings. We saw George Floyd, we saw the uprising and everything that was happening around the country, and for those of us that felt the direct impact, some of the trauma associated with watching
Mhm.
that on television, we didn't really know where to put those feelings, and we weren't going into the workplace, and we really didn't have those connections, so it became that type of community. On the flip side of that, during that time frame, I was given LinkedIn Top Voice for Education in late 2020. I was a part of LinkedIn's Create Accelerator program in 2022. So I think there is definitely is an ebb and flow in that it's much reflective of what's happened around the country. There is some amount of interest, but I still daily get DMs, direct messages from Black folk that are saying, "Hey, I love your content. Please keep pushing forward." It's encouraging me to see that our voices are being heard, but they're not necessarily liking my content. They don't necessarily comment, because
Interesting.
there are still a lot of people that are just like they would in the workplace, that are afraid to have these conversations. And I felt like it was my responsibility. I've been at my job 10 years. So there really wasn't for me a direct, like, oh, okay, I'm motivated to get on here and be an influencer. I actually had a lot of people in my profession, which is higher education, which is typically traditional, very conservative for the most part, not as liberal as people would think. A lot of people told
Mhm.
me, don't post about that, it's going to make you seem too radical, people may take it the wrong way. But my thought process was, I'm an educator, I'm only speaking facts. Even in my book there are like 130 citations, because I don't believe in just speaking my opinion. My opinion is valid to a certain extent, but how do I validate the fact that this is a phenomenon? And I think that LinkedIn really is the fact that the algorithm, when people say suppresses it, I always tell people it's not really necessarily the algorithm is suppressing it, because it's AI. And I work in tech
Right.
because I work in online learning, and platforms only do what they're designed to do. So the platform doesn't have a mind of its own, but what it can do is look at
Right.
trends. It can look at what usually gets traction, and then it will promote those things. And unfortunately, because of the state of America, because of the state of corporate America, and some of these conversations being labeled as uncomfortable conversations. Even those of us that do social justice advocacy work, when we get invited into a corporate organization, typically they say we're going to have one of those uncomfortable conversations. And I'm like, well, why is it uncomfortable? We're talking about psychological safety. We're talking about Black folk in the workplace equity, things that really should not be uncomfortable. It should be a matter of fact that these are things that need to be fixed and what can you do about it. But unfortunately, what has happened is those conversations have been labeled as, oh, it's going to be a blame game. Oh, I'm going to feel bad. Oh, I'm going to be made to feel guilty. And that's much why the algorithm, I would say, it doesn't suppress it. Really, the users suppress it. You have people that don't want to engage with that type of content. And typically, what the algorithm will do is going to push content that is consumed by people that are on the platform. So you see that these types of conversations are having impact on TikTok. They're having impact on Instagram, on Twitter, because users engage. They don't feel under the eye of their boss. They're not afraid that potential
Right.
employers might see it. So the algorithm is only going to feed you what you engage with. And I often tell people, if you don't see my content, it's because you have not been engaging with me. I have 78 million views on the LinkedIn platform since I
That's
started posting in 2020. I have 170,000 or so followers. So I was getting up to 1,000 followers a day during the pandemic, and now I'm probably getting about 1,000 followers a week. And my posts have gone viral, over 1 million views on a single post, and I've had several that have done that. So I don't necessarily feel that LinkedIn can suppress. I always tell people if they were going to suppress someone, they would suppress me, because I post every day, and I'm always posting very radical views about social justice, inequity, and why things need to change. I think what's happening, maybe a little bit more so, as people are starting to have those conversations and they're starting to feel more that there's a pressing need, especially with what's going on around the country. But I think there was a time where, especially after George Floyd, it kind of simmered down a
Mhm.
little bit, that people just felt like, hey, business as usual. I don't want to engage with those kinds of conversation. And you do still find that those conversations, unless you do have a huge following on the platform like I do, you're not going to have as much engagement because of the
Yeah.
fact that people are afraid to have those conversations.
It's interesting because as you were talking, I I'm guilty of doing that. I'm guilty of saying, "Hey, yeah, we're gonna have this conversation. It's gonna be an uncomfortable conversation, but we're gonna have it because we need to have it."
Yeah.
I say that all the time about our summit, and as you're talking, I'm like, I'm not gonna say that again
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it's shouldn't be uncomfortable. How do we
Mm-mm.
get comfortable with these conversations or help people reframe them in a way that it is not, you know,
Yeah.
uncomfortable?
Yeah, and you make a good point. I've said it myself. When I first started doing equity work, I would say, oh, this is going to be an uncomfortable conversation. But I started to say to myself, well, anything that I want to do that I haven't done, and or I've done before, but now want to go back to doing. Like, I haven't been working out as much because it was wintertime. Now it's summer again. I'm back in the gym. I'm walking outside. I'm doing the things that I wasn't doing when it was like 30 degrees. I'm
Mhm.
not going to have an uncomfortable gym session. I'm going to go to the gym and I'm going to work out. And I think that's really what we have to look at when we're having conversations that we want to grow, we want to learn, we want to undo behavior that could be harmful for other people or for ourselves. The best thing to do is just do it. You don't say it's uncomfortable. I don't say, oh, I worked out at the gym and I had an uncomfortable gym workout. I just say I killed it at the gym. I want to feel pain. I want my muscles to be stretching and
Mhm.
growing. So it's going to hurt, and that's, I think, what has to happen. These conversations have to be had. We're seeing that it's more and more urgent as we look at what's happening around our country and around some of these issues that have been laying festering under the surface. So I
Yeah.
think that for the most part, there really needs to be more transparency in leadership across corporate America. Those of us that have a media platform and a voice like yourself, those are the people that we really have to lead the conversations. And I don't think there's any shame in the idea that, oh, I thought that was uncomfortable, but now I think about it, now maybe it's not. I think it's great because it just shows that we're willing to grow and learn and just pivot and think about the way that we frame our conversations and the way that we view other people that we care about.
And it's what we all need to do, right? Like it's
Yes.
the same thing, me saying that right now and realizing that it's the same realization we have to have about the way we've been doing things
Sure.
and back to psychological safety, which is kind of how you started,
Yes.
or what you started pointing out as one of the core things that we need to work on.
Sure.
I've been reading a lot and curious to know your point of view on this. We when people tend to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion within organizations, a lot of companies and a lot of professionals in the space start with the business case
Mhm.
for diversity and inclusion.
Mhm.
I've been reading some articles and some studies, but mostly kind of a mix of things that are saying the business case, we shouldn't be leaning on the business case as much.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you go into the business case, a lot of the times people who you are describing as or like we are describing as minorities or that are being othered in a way, you can start thinking your performance is now not just evaluated on performance but on identity, because we're out there saying, diversity will lead to better profits, and I'm doing a very simplistic
Mm-hmm.
um, rendition of
Mm-hmm.
the business case for diversity,
Mm-hmm.
but that's kind of what it says.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. I've been thinking a lot about this. Like, are we
Mm-hmm.
doing more harm than good
Mm-hmm.
by anchoring the importance of DEIB for on a company's perspective versus on the human perspective?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We are doing more harm than good. And I've said that, I think, from the very beginning when I first started thinking about DEI and the business aspect of it, because I'm primarily my profession is an educator, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a trained psychologist. I'm not a DEI uh, professional. I'm not someone that goes into corporate organizations and really gives them, well, these are the things you need to do. However, just looking at it just like you did, logically,
Mm-hmm.
we shouldn't have to say the business case to hire women. We shouldn't have to say the
Right.
business case to diversify the workforce, because the workforce should be diverse. If we're living in a society that has 100% is the whole, and then you have 70% is majority culture that identifies as white, and then you have a mixture of other different types of demographic people that have been racialized as Black, Latin folk, other folk that have historically been excluded. My argument is just like yours. I don't think it's fair to say to an organization, here, let me give you a business incentive, which is you're going to make more
Right.
profit. That means that my only worthiness within an organization is because of the diverse ideas. And my thought process as well, even in looking at it logically, if that business case for diversity worked, we wouldn't have the need for DEI. People would just say, wow, I want to make more money, so let me hire more diverse people. But that's not what's happening. Actually, we're going backwards. And for myself, working in higher education, I've worked in this field for 20 years. Our demographic that we serve, which is students, is actually getting more and more Black and brown. There are
Mm-hmm.
students that are actually 30% is coming from minoritized groups, whether they're Latin, whether they're Black, other, whatever the case may be, other racial groups, but not the majority. So my thought process is, if we were really worried about and really focused on what's best for our students, for example, with our business model, which is education, higher education, particularly for me, we would automatically hire faculty that look like those students, so those students would
Right.
feel comfortable. We don't. 7% of faculty are Black and brown. About maybe 3 to 5% of administrators are Black and brown. So really, you don't
Oh my God,
see a
that's
lot of,
crazy.
yeah, and you don't see a lot of diversity other than maybe frontline. So you might see financial aid counselors, academic counselors, but it's once you get into the classroom and leadership, there are very few college presidents that are Black. So you see that if we were really responsive to student needs, we would make a concerted effort to ensure that our staff and our infrastructure match the students that we serve, but we don't. So that shows that there really isn't an incentive to say, okay, I know my students would be more comfortable with a Black faculty member, so I've talked to people, and I say this on LinkedIn all the time. How many Black professors have you had? I had one Black professor in all of my undergraduate study. And I think in grad school, I had one. Yeah, one. So that
Yeah,
lets you know. Yeah.
I'm going back through my and for college I wasn't in the US, but for grad school, yeah, I had one Black professor.
Correct. So that lets you know that the business case really, I don't find that to be a compelling argument. If people have to be motivated by money to hire me, I really don't want to work there, because my thought
Right.
process would be, if you don't, as a leader, and that's why I really feel like DEI has reached a it's like a point where people have to understand really the history of DEI. DEI as a field was built from the civil rights movement, when we had all
Mhm.
these laws and rules that went into place to say, hey, you have to hire people, EEOC and all these different civil rights legislation, which said Black folk deserve to also be hired in the workplace. Really, what happened was now you have a department that is designed really under HR to look at what is the compliance of this. What happens if we get
Right.
sued? How do we make sure if we have a complaint that we are responsive to that? Then you have, some programming, maybe some employee resource groups, things that a company has to do. But what I was hearing from DEI practitioners, particularly after George Floyd, because it was an en masse of people that went into
Mm-hmm.
DEI, it's become a multi-billion-dollar business. But many
Yep.
people were saying, I'm getting pushback. I'm getting pushback. And I started to say, well, getting pushback on what? Because my thought process is, if you as a leader, you're now aware. You were never aware before, but after George Floyd, you're suddenly aware that you need to have a more diverse workplace. First of all, to me, that's like, I don't even understand that argument. But let's say, just
I know.
suspend belief for right now and say, okay, you were never aware that you
Let's put that
Let's
aside.
put that aside, because maybe you're in Silicon Valley and you thought it was okay to have 3% Black folk within your organization. Let's just say. But then if you look at it, now I have to come in as an outside consultant and convince you and take you through unconscious bias to make you understand why you think Black folks are not as competent it almost is offensive, I think, when I think about just what's
Right.
happening, because it's almost like, so you're getting a contract to go in and teach a leader, take them by the hands and say, Liz is just as competent as someone else, and this is a white woman that has the same education. Can you kind of look past what you've seen on social media, or maybe what you
Oh my
saw,
God.
on The Wire, and just really just understand that she actually is educated and could do her job? The whole idea of it started to strike me as nonsensical. So like you, I'm looking at, really, leaders have to be accountable. I always say to people, I'm not a psychologist, so I don't know why. When we think about unconscious bias, you have people going into organizations, it's like they haven't studied psychology. They might have taken a class for Cornell University. Now they're a DEI practitioner, and they're going to understand inside someone's brain why they will see two resumes and see Lakeisha on one and Becky on another, and say, oh, Becky probably is the better fit. Or they hire someone that looks like them in their social circle and then wonder why Black folk are not getting in the door. And I think these are all common sense things. But when we look at historically what has happened, we have a structure that, just like Black folk, have been conditioned and trained to work harder, get another degree. If they're not seeing your worth, just keep trying. You also have a whole generation and several generations of those in the majority that have been taught, unfortunately, that, hey, if her name's Lakeisha, I don't know, maybe there's some other candidates that might be a little bit better. And to say it's unconscious, I always say, if you're not a zombie and you're not asleep, you're conscious. So to say that that person has an unconscious bias or doesn't know what they're doing, I don't believe that. And I don't think the business case is going to fix it. People have to have these hard conversations. And I think we
Mm-hmm.
have to hold leadership accountable. And I think for the public, if I always say, if we can find a way to get people to Mars, which we're doing for $250,000. I ordered from Amazon this morning and my package just got here before I started recording with you. If we can figure those things out, we can figure out how to hire people equitably. It's not that complicated.
It's not that complicated.
No,
Really, it isn't.
no.
So I'm curious to change. I'm going to change a little bit gears because I definitely want to ask you about this. As an educator and as someone who is in social justice and an activist, can you talk to me a little bit about your thoughts on affirmative action? I've been thinking quite a bit about it and the fact that, it's going to be heard by the Supreme Court this year and what that impact is going to be.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think the thing about the way that society is and what's happened since the civil rights movement is the civil rights movement ended in the 50s and 60s with that legislation, but that didn't cost America anything. So you have laws that were put into place. And then really it's almost like, I always say, it's Dracula's guarding the blood bank, right? If I hire Dracula to guard the blood bank, I can't be mad if I go there and there's no blood. It just is what it is, because he has
Right.
to get blood somewhere. And I say, hey, come watch my blood bank. So I feel as though I worked in the mortgage business early in my career. And I actually was working at one of the biggest subprime lenders, AmeriQuest, when the great crash happened in
Wow.
2008. And I remember seeing a lot of the things that were happening, being very early in my career, being like, okay, doesn't look right, but I don't know. I'm just going to go along with the flow. And I think a lot of times that's what has happened. And in order to really create change, things like affirmative action, I think people feel like, oh, it's reverse racism. No, what it's doing is it's actually righting things that have never been fixed. If you think about this idea
Mhm.
that if we had civil rights legislation that was passed, and it wasn't a million years ago, it wasn't 150 years ago.
No.
Slavery only ended the enslavement of people. And when we think about slavery, sometimes we say, oh, slavery, it's human trafficking. It's people that were kidnapped from another country and brought here to work for
Yeah.
free. And that didn't happen for a year or 2 years. That happened, we're talking about hundreds of years of, we are now, when we think about any Black person that is from Caribbean descent, like I am, or from Brazil, or from America. Actually, America had probably the smallest percentage of slaves, so enslaved Africans. So when we think about all the descendants of that, that was a human trafficking scheme, a ring to
Yeah.
bring free labor to build a country. And I think sometimes we're not saying it what it is. We're not calling a thing. And then we are saying, well, just figure it out and pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And we don't need to do things like reparations or affirmative action. Why not? Because when we think about atrocities and things that have happened, whether Germany, whether South Africa, there always has to be a way to try to repair what has been done. And that has never
Right.
been done in this country. So you have now a wealth gap in income disparity and
Mhm.
disparity in almost every single area, from healthcare to wages to hiring to school systems to neighborhoods to mortgages. Anything that you could think of, Black folk tend to fall at the bottom or very near the bottom, maybe only next to Indigenous folk that are only 1.1% of the population, where we're 14%. So my thought process is, when it comes to affirmative action, it's not reverse anything. What it's doing is
Right.
fixing what was never fixed. The civil rights movement did not fix anything. And as a matter of fact, the pushback and actually maybe more of the underlying ways of enforcing something, which was the Jim Crow, quote unquote, segregation that ended during that time. That's literally what needs to happen. And those things have become unsaid. And now, with a lot of what's going on around the country, people are saying the quiet part out loud, which was, we don't want you in these places. We don't feel that
Right.
you're a leader. We want things to be how they were, and we want you to let us drive. And unfortunately, that's not an option. Black folk are not going to just sit back and just say, oh, well, we're just going to be a passenger where we're not getting paid. We're not getting even
Mm.
health outcomes that we should, because we're at the bottom of every metrics that would cause you to have emotional, physical, or mental stability or well-being. I always say, unless all Black folk, especially right now with everything that's happened and the fact that we're able to see things in real time, unless we're all suffering from mass hysteria, something is wrong, and we can't fix it alone. Those that are in leadership positions have to take a look at what they're doing. As Toni Morrison said, that is not Black folk or the oppressed. It's not our job to fix something that was nothing to do with us. We didn't create the structure. America has to go look in the mirror and see, is this who you want to be? And from what we're seeing on the news, it's not a pretty sight. So leaders in corporate America have to think the same thing. Who do you want to be? And if you want to be the person that I have to come in and hold your hand to make you hire a Black person, because you just inherently have some idea in your head that this person may not be as qualified, that person has to go ask themselves why. Because I don't know the answer to that.
Oof. Yeah, it is very much a take a look in the mirror
Yes.
moment. I agree with you.
Yeah.
And you're right. And it's very, a lot of times, that's what we see, what you were saying. Black and brown and people who are underrepresented or have been historically underrepresented, those are the people who have to end up carrying the weight of
Mhm.
fixing things,
Mhm.
where we didn't do anything.
Right. Right.
It's not our fault.
Not at
So,
all. And if you're doing the right thing, and I think that's where it becomes unfair. I think this generation is the first generation that really has had the full benefit of having the access. I think the previous generation, maybe boomers or very older Gen Xers, were going to segregated schools, didn't necessarily have the ability to go to college. This is the first generation, when we think about some of the younger Gen Xers, millennials, even Gen Zs, that are starting to look around and feel like, wait a second, I'm doing everything that I needed to do. I've done everything my parents told me to do. They said, go to college. They said, work hard. They said, keep your head down, do everything you're supposed to do. But yet I'm still not making what I need to make. When you think about Black
Right.
women's pay equity, if it's 9 months longer, if you have to work an additional 9 months than a white man to
Oh
get the
yeah,
same
don't
amount
get
of
me
pay,
started.
how can that be fair? And I shouldn't have to give somebody a business case because they can go in their HR payroll and see that. So that's something
Yeah.
that's intentional. And as you said, it's not our fault. It's not our fault that we're being perceived as not as competent. It's not our fault that we're getting microaggressions thrown at us, but that we want to leave these environments because we just don't feel that psychological safety. That is for leaders to really take a hard look at what they're doing and stop saying it's unconscious, stop saying there's nothing you can do. James Baldwin said this: how much longer do you want for your progress? And I think right now what we're seeing is people saying, okay, enough is enough. We've waited. You've said it takes time. There's no more time. You have to do what you need to do. Stop blaming it. And it's a lot of
Mhm.
victim blaming. If you were just this, this, and this, and we all know from being in very toxic or sometimes seeing abusive relationships, that's typically what happens. You have this dynamic
Yep.
where somebody's in control and they're telling you, if you would only do better, I would do better. That's not what a leader does. A leader leads and then you follow. And if you're not leading me anywhere that's good, I'm not going to follow you.
Oh, I love that so much. A leader leads, and if you're not leading me somewhere good, I'm not going to follow.
No.
I think it's so simple, but yet why is it so hard for people?
That's a very good question. That is the $1,000,000 question. It's not the business case either that we're talking about here. Why aren't they doing it? And that's what I want to know. Because I believe in objectives, assessment, and outcome. And that's
Mhm.
literally what I've done my whole educational career. I go into a classroom and it is my job to make my students successful. There's differentiation of learning, which means that some may be English as a second language. Some may have gone to great schools. Some may have gone to poor schools. Some may have taken the class before. So all of those 30 students, 50 students, whatever the number is, I have to help each one of them be successful. If I go in my classroom and half of them fail, I did not do my job. So I'm always comparing me as a classroom instructor at a college to someone that's leading a company. If you're going into a company and your retention rate is poor, you don't have a pipeline for Black folk when you know there's 100 HBCUs all over the country, and you can go into even PWIs, predominantly white institutions, and be purposeful about saying, hey, our environment needs to be more diverse, and let's figure out how to make that happen because we haven't done it in the past, but hey, our bad, let's fix it. That would be acceptable. But this idea that, oh, I don't know what's happening, I'm not sure, I'm not, that to me seems really disingenuous because looking at it from the outside in, if I needed to create a company and make sure that I staffed it reflective of my consumers or reflective of society, I would be able to do it. So what is the
Right.
holdup? And I think there is a lot of, there's entitlement. There's people that have always been
Mhm.
able to be in control, people that have always had those positions. And frankly, they don't want to see different types of people there. They want to see people that look like them. And I'm always asking, well, if you went into companies and everywhere you went, it was all Black and Latin folk, and you were the only white person, how would you feel? Would you feel good? Would you like that?
Oh my
And
god,
most,
they'd feel attacked.
they would feel awful. So the idea that we're supposed to go into environments and just say, well, that's just the way it is, that is nonsense. And I just think that right now there is, I think, a floodgate of people, Black and brown women particularly, have been, because of that intersectionality between race and gender, the most affected by this and are
Yeah.
leaving corporate America in rapid record numbers. So if they don't figure it out, they're going to be losing a lot of talent. And my thought process is, do you care about that? And if you don't, then
Right.
there's really no point in even talking about the business case because you've already
Right.
decided that you're going to do things the way that you want to do them.
Right. Okay, so switching gears again, because I could talk to you about the business case, about
Yeah,
diversity.
I
I could
love
talk
it.
to you about the affirmative action situation that has me very nervous, to be
Yes.
honest,
Yeah, for sure.
for a long time. But I want to hear about your book
Sure.
because, can I just say, I love the title.
Thank you.
I think I identify very much with it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a Black woman, but
Mm-hmm.
I am brown and a
Mm-hmm.
Latina, and therefore I get the I I get the stereotypes,
Sure, absolutely.
and I'd love to hear more about what led you to write the book and what did you learn while doing it? Because I know it's very much based on, like you said, facts and research.
For sure. I think being on LinkedIn really gave me a unique insight because I really had only been connected with other people in higher education. I hadn't really networked outside of
Hmm.
my sphere in terms of what I do for my job, which is instructional design as a director. So being on LinkedIn, I was exposed to people from all different industries where media, marketing, healthcare, nonprofit, venture capitalists, people that had been in business, people had been at some of the biggest companies around the world, like your Microsofts and your Hulus and A&E and media companies, H&M. It's like I can't even
Hmm.
name all the companies, and everyone had very similar stories, particularly Black women, also brown women, also women that had not been represented at the at definitely
Hmm.
demographically at the rates that they should have been, and definitely hadn't reached the pinnacle of where they should have been in their leadership career. Because a lot of women, even like myself, even if you get into the C-suite, you're still like, well, but I see other people that are doing a lot better, and I have just as much experience
Yep.
as them, and I've had the education. How come I'm getting passed over? So I just started to see a trend, and I really wanted to see why that was. And I'm not yelling. The idea for it was because of these stereotypes. We see this, and I'm from South Florida. So in my background, my parents are Jamaican. My dad's side is of Cuban descent. So you do hear these stereotypes of Black women being aggressive, Latin women
Hmm.
also being loud, or people feel like you need to tone it down. And my thought process was, if I'm being professional, why am I always being spoken over? Why do people say
Hmm.
that they're intimidated by me, or they feel as though I'm there? I'm angry, and I wasn't angry at all. I was just literally talking in a board meeting or in a leadership meeting, and I really
Right.
started to put all those pieces together. The women I spoke with on the platform, my own personal experience from being in the C-suite because I got promoted during COVID. And I started to see there was a pattern, and I wanted to explore the microaggressions that were happening, some of the things around the idea of authenticity and your voice and code switching and our hair and how we dress and how we present, and why were we conditioned
Hmm.
to believe, especially from the people that we encountered in our C-suites or in our communities or in our networking events, that what we were presenting as was not good enough. And that's an amount of
Yeah.
self-worth and doubt was leading women to have emotional issues, mental health concerns, healthcare, and physical results from some of that stress and trauma that they were experiencing in the workplace. I was hearing stories every day of people just leaving because they just felt overwhelmed by the amount of toxicity in these workplaces. And I wanted to research to see what the research said, what was
Yeah.
historically had been happening. What did the research say? Because there's tons of studies, which I cited in the book, about why these things are happening, how they're happening, some strategies to mitigate those circumstances. And really the end result was really to focus on that self-healing and that journey of accepting ourselves, because a lot of us have never done that. We've really never looked at who we are, not in relationship to our job as the primary way of framing who we are as a person.
That's a very good point. I feel like during the pandemic, some people started kind of taking that look
Mm-hmm,
at like, where do I exist
mm-hmm,
in the realm of everything that is me, including my work?
mm-hmm.
But it's not something, I don't think, especially for minorities, that we've had room for.
No, no, because we're,
Because
we're
we're
we're not taught to do that. We're taught to just
right,
work.
right,
Yeah.
and work harder
Yes.
and more. Like,
Right.
it's double.
Yes.
I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. That's what we're told, to work twice as hard. So we
Right.
almost didn't have the luxury, even though a lot of people you saw, oh, people are going off the grid and people are exploring. A lot of us that have been historically excluded, minoritized, racialized, we are like, oh, I don't have time for that. I'm an immigrant, and my parents don't
Right.
would not accept me just taking off for a year and traipsing around the country, or looking inside to figure out what I really want to do. And a lot of us, because of our economic standing as well, because we're not
Hmm.
paid as much, and Latin
Hmm.
women the same. the equity in terms of our counterparts is not equivalent and we're not making the same amount of money, the ability to even say, well, I'll put aside 6 months of savings to try to figure it out. We didn't have that because we don't make the same amount of money. So there is a certain amount of privilege that comes with that. And for most of us, we just didn't have it. So we have to also keep in mind, though, that for a lot of us, this is life or death, because our
Right.
health outcomes when it comes to depression, anxiety, autoimmune disease, all these things that are triggered by stress was a lot higher than our
Yep.
counterparts. So it's almost like women were leaving these workplaces without even another job lined up because they're like, I haven't thought about it,
Mhm.
but if I go in this workplace one more time, I'm not going to make it out because I'm beyond stress. So,
Yeah.
yeah, there is this sense that we want to look inside, but we just haven't had the luxury of being able to do so in a meaningful way.
But I think we're starting to,
We're
and I think it's
starting.
important to have resources like your book
Thank
that ping you to kind of or push you to
you.
kind of start that.
Start that journey for sure. Because if we don't, then who will? People
Right.
really get stuck on this, it's almost like a hamster wheel. I just got to, if I just work a little bit more hard, it's like a bad relationship or something. If you're in a bad relationship, you're always like, if I stay one more day, maybe another day of counseling, maybe if we go on a date, a date night, something will fix it. And some things are just not
Mhm.
fixable. And some things are maybe only fixable until you can find something that will better serve your needs. The last chapter in the book is called A Seat at the Table or Building Your Own Empire. And one of the questions that was asked by one of the guests on my podcast when I had a podcast before was, does this space deserve me? So this idea when you're going into a space,
Oh.
really being more self-reflective, not of let me get in here and show them what I have and I have to work twice as hard and I don't care, I won't take lunch, I won't take vacation, they're going to see my worth, because ultimately that's not what's happening. Maybe taking a step back and saying, what do I want? How is this serving my needs? Am I valued here? And if I'm not valued here, what is an exit strategy so I can figure out a place that will be less stressful, more accepting, more fulfilling? Sometimes that may not be entrepreneurship, although it could be, but maybe it's just looking at prioritizing well being and our health before prioritizing a job and a title.
That does this space deserve me?
Yeah. Does this
Oof.
space deserve me?
It's a great question.
Yeah, it is.
It really is a great question.
And it could be asked anywhere, not just in the workplace. We have to
Mhm.
take care of ourselves everywhere we go. So thinking about all of our interactions, does this space deserve me? Should I be here? Am I valued here? Do I feel safe here? Because powering through, we've seen that during the pandemic, that's not necessarily the way that we're going to really reach that emotional well-being and that level of being totally safe and feeling like we're valued and we belong somewhere. Sometimes that space is just not ready. I think Hannah Nicole Jones said this really well when she left University of North Carolina because they would not give her tenure due to the
Mhm.
1619 project and all of the pushback. And she went to Howard and she said, when they asked her, well, why did you do that? She said, it is not my job to heal University of North Carolina. I think a lot of us are going into relationships, friendships, and particularly into the workplace as if it's our job to heal that space. And if that space isn't ready to heal, there's really not a lot you can do. And I know sometimes people get frustrated. They're like, well, I thought you were going to have some strategies. I don't have strategies for everything because not everything is fixable. Maybe it won't be today. Maybe it won't be 6 months from now. Are you willing to stick in there for 6 months? And maybe it will never change, or maybe it'll change after you leave. And I think sometimes we see that with relationships. We're like, oh, I've moved on and now that person's happily married. Are they really? Are they really happily married? You don't know that. You're looking at the outside. Maybe you see something on Facebook, but maybe you needed to leave in order for you to reach where you needed to go. Don't worry. Don't look behind you. Look forward. And I think that's really the message I'm telling women in the book. Focus on yourself. Don't focus on outward and what things look like and positions and titles and money. Of course, it's important. Everybody has bills to pay, but you can't pay your bills if you're in hospital because you have stress
Yeah.
and anxiety and you had an episode and you had to be admitted. So I think we have to put things in perspective and look at what's important and what serves us and just ask that question, does this space deserve me? Because it's a fair question.
I can't agree with you more. This is, I love that. And I love that question. Does the space disturb me? Okay,
Yeah,
so let's go into our little lightning
for
round.
sure.
These are just fun questions.
Okay.
Does pineapple belong on pizza?
I love pineapple on pizza. I know I'm probably going to get a lot of backlash, but if I'm going to eat pizza, I literally Hawaiian is like the only pizza that I like.
I'm with you. I like
I love
pineapple
it. Yeah.
on pizza. So, would you rather explore outer space or the bottom of the ocean?
Ooh, I think outer space. I always tell people I think that I'm an alien because I always tell people I'm just taking notes so I can bring it back to my planet. So I would have to say if I was going to explore somewhere, it definitely would be outer space. And I'm a big Trekkie and I love Star Wars and all kinds of like Marvel superheroes. So space and maybe different metaverses and different Marvel character universes, that would be probably what I
Yeah.
would want to explore. Yeah.
So, as a fellow nerd of Marvel and the likes, uh, if you could have any superpower, what would it be?
Ooh, that is such a good question. I think I would probably be like Doctor Strange and I probably would want to bend
Mm,
time.
he's my favorite.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love that
Uh,
idea of being in a hop in and out of different
oh,
times and different universes and bend time. I mean, it's kind of radical when you think about this idea that this the way that things are, why is this the way that it is? And it's really because of a series of choices. And what if we could take one choice and take that out? How would that change the rest of all of our reality? So I'm always thinking like that as well.
oh, I like that.
Yeah.
Most used app on your phone.
Oh my gosh, probably LinkedIn because I spend an inordinate amount of time on there. Probably a lot more than I should. And if after that, probably Instagram because I love scrolling and looking at all the videos. It's super fascinating to me. So yeah.
Favorite recent read.
Oh, wow. My favorite recent read. I'm gonna say my book.
Go for it. I'm sure
I'm not
that
yelling.
is
It's my favorite.
that is valid.
Definitely my favorite recent read. And it's on audiobook too for people that don't like to read.
Did you do the audiobook?
No, actually it was a voice actress and she is amazing. She's I was it was like breathtaking to hear how she did the whole voice, like everything about it was amazing.
It must be so weird to hear your words read by someone else.
Yeah, it's extremely strange to hear, but I it's strange but also fascinating to hear that interpretation, you know?
Yeah, I'm
So,
sure.
yeah.
Okay. And finally, what's one thought you'd want to leave with our listeners?
I think my biggest takeaway from writing the book was thinking about how we talk to ourselves. And this has
Mm,
been something that I've been working on a lot, just making sure, just like asking those questions, does this space deserve me? Also talking to
mhm.
ourselves with love. So really giving
Oh,
ourselves
yeah.
grace, making sure that we're checking in with ourselves. I think we always say, well, check in with people that you love, check in with people, make sure people are okay, but also check in with yourself. Talk to yourself with patience, talk to yourself with love. I saw a quote from Meghan Markle right at the very beginning when she first was getting married or whatever the case may be. And I remember her saying, if we talk to ourselves the way that we talk to other people with care and with respect, the world would be totally different. So I think looking at how we talk to ourselves and making sure that we talk to ourselves with love, that would be the biggest takeaway that I would say for today.
I love that. That's a really good one. Well, thank you, Liz. I'm already calling you
Thank
Liz,
you.
but
Yeah, no, I love
thank you.
it. That's what everybody calls me. Thank you. This has been a pleasure. It's been a blast. I appreciate you.
All right, welcome back. I hope you're all as big of a fan of Elizabeth Leiba as I am, now that you've heard that. Let's talk about our history makers for this week. Rebecca Weiner was named the NYPD's first female deputy commissioner of intelligence and counterterrorism. Shuwanza Goff became the first Black woman director of the Office of Legislative Affairs for the White House. Carolee Dodge Francis became the first Native woman to chair a department at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Jacqueline Gwynn Villarroel became the first Black woman to lead the Louisville Police Department. Cassie Myers became the first woman to serve as Veterans of Foreign Wars Post Commander for the Ward Roney Jr. Post 7511 in Monroe. And Xochitl Torres Small became the first Latina Deputy Agriculture Secretary of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Next week, actually, you're going to get one of my interviews, which is really fun. Don't worry, there's still plenty of Maricela content to come in. It's just I took over with helping her occasionally on interviews before she left. So we're going to have a few of mine sprinkled in here, even before we run out of hers. And that is with Alana Dewar, who is the Director of U.S. Projects for Deep Blue Pacific Wind. She's responsible for the development and implementation of market-specific strategies to deploy innovative and cost-effective floating offshore wind projects in the United States. She's been part of the offshore wind industry in the U.S. since 2013, with experience in both the public and private sectors. We talk so much about her industry because I just think it's so interesting. And we talk about, our oceans, and we talk about just how we can provide cleaner, safer energy. You're not going to want to miss this one. So great. Come back next week, and we'll see you then. Ellevate Network drives real results for ambitious women trying to break through the glass ceiling and achieve success in their careers. We offer a platform full of resources and opportunities for growth, all designed to help you unlock your potential. With Ellevate support, you can take the first step toward achieving your professional goals. With a supportive community and tangible resources at your fingertips, you're only one step away from reaching your fullest potential. Join us today and take advantage of our 30-day free trial to start building the career of your dreams. Thanks so much for listening to the Ellevate podcast. If you like what you hear, you can subscribe, give us 5 stars, and share your review. You can learn all about Ellevate membership and all the great things that Ellevate Network is doing at our website, www.ellevatenetwork.com. That's ELLEVATE network.com. And special thanks to our producer, Catherine Heller. She rocks. Thanks so much, and join us next week.